Buy multifamily, they said. Make a ton of money, they said. But no one is keeping it real about what it's like operating multifamily properties. This video is for you if you've been trying to decide between single family and multifamily for your real estate investments. I'm going to compare small multifamily and single family rentals through the lens of what it's like to actually run them. So the advice that everybody gives you is to go multifamily, that it is better than single family, because everybody's looking at the numbers. For one, they're looking at the profitability. They're typically multifamily has better returns. You only have one loan. You only have one location to manage, and it's a better risk profile. And that's mostly true because if you have a single family residence or rental, I should say, and it goes vacant all year, I mean, you have no profitability for the entire year, and you're actually in the negative because you have to foot the bill for all the expenses, versus if you have a small multifamily like I do. I have some fourplexes, etc. And like I actually have a fourplex right now where 3 units are filled and 1 unit has been vacant for a year. Don't ask me why, but 1 unit, it needs a lot of work. And since the building is actually still profitable without that unit, we just kind of been skirting by without it. But I would recommend that long term. However, like I said, the building is still functioning and actually still profitable every month, even with 1 unit being vacant. So that is why people are, pro multifamily, and that's the preferred method. Like the more doors you can have under one roof, the better. And I mean, that's true for most of my portfolio. Out of the 90 units that I have, only 2 of them are actually single family homes. And I do have some townhouse style apartments, but it's like a block of 5 townhouses together that, even though from a renter's perspective, they don't share anything with the other tenants, if from the owner's perspective, it's still a multifamily because they all share the same amenities, for lack of a better term. So, and from my experience, the main difference between single family rentals and multifamily rentals is the drama. Single family rentals are a lot less drama, and that is what nobody on the internet wants to talk about and own. The big thing that creates the drama is that multifamily, what it really means, despite the extra revenue and the lowered risk and all that, what it really means is sharing. It boils down to people who don't know each other having to share a space together. And I think it's different with small multifamily, versus like these huge apartment complexes where it's hundreds of people who live there. When you only have 2 to 4 units, it's almost like your own space, and it's almost like this private dwelling, but it's not. And so when you get into that situation, they're sharing, maybe some utilities. They may be sharing hot water heater. They're sharing common areas. They're sharing washers and dryers. They're sharing yards. They're sharing parking. They're sharing trash cans. And so some of the drama that arises from people who don't know each other and don't like each other having to share, I mean, they're parking, there's disputes over parking spaces. So-and-so parked in my parking space. So-and-so had my car towed. So-and-so called the police on me and my friends because they said we were too loud. These are all things that actually happen every day. And when you are thinking about becoming a real estate investor, that is something you are completely not thinking about. You're not thinking that you are about to become like a den mother, that these grown people are going to call you about petty disputes. And, I'm constantly having to tell my maintenance manager that like, we are not running a shelter house here. We are not top flight security. Like, if you have a dispute, like what would you normally do? You'd call the police, or you'd figure out a way to manage through. But for some reason, when people have a number that they can call, or, a specific person in their mind that they can go run to about all of these little things, they do. And so that was a huge part of the reason why I had to put AI in place, like as a buffer, so that people, you can come to my AI and you can rant and you can rave and you can give all of that. But I cannot have my grounds team actually spending time listening to your random drama that you're having with your neighbor. That, and most of it as an owner, I can't really get involved. I can't tell another grown person what to do. You know, if it's a lease violation, then I can step in and I can send a note. But it's like, come on, y'all. For the most, for the most part, it's like, come on, y'all. And then the other thing that I've run into is that, you know, I've bought properties with people living there, and sometimes, you know, they've been living there for 15 years. You know, they've been living there for 20 years. They feel like the place is theirs. They feel like they set the rules. They can kind of dictate things. And so there's always this tussle back and forth with them about, no, you actually don't own here. You are simply a guest as well. And I don't know, like, I've never heard of anyone in a large apartment complex with 100 units. I've never heard anyone say a tenant is acting like they own this place. Because I think when it's so big and it's so many moving parts, like, it's very clear that you are just, you know, one of many. But when it's just two of them or even four of them, for some reason, people start to feel like, no, this is a house. This is my house, and other people just live here. The other thing that I didn't know when I became an investor was the difference in mindset between people who live in single family rentals and those who live in multifamily. And this is just my experience. Not calling anybody out, not making any judgments here. But the people who are looking for your single family rentals, they have a homeowner mindset. They're looking for privacy. They're usually looking for something more long term, and they're usually looking for something that they can kind of make their own. And it'll, you know, to make it feel like they own a home. And so their mindset is usually different about how they treat the property and generally their responsibility level. What I've seen with people in the small multifamily markets, it's clearly more of an apartment mindset. It's more of a transient mindset. You know, most of them this is just a stop for them. It's not anything permanent. I do have some tenants in some of my larger units that they literally plan to stay there forever. But I think that's not something investors are thinking about readily when they're looking at investments. I know I was not, because if I had to do it all over again, I probably would not have bought any 1-bedroom apartments. And that's because they're harder to fill. The people are less committed, I should say, to the unit. And because when you're just one person, it's easy to pick up and go. Like, if something happens you don't like, your lease comes up, the rent increase is higher than you want to pay, like, you just pick up and go. Versus when there's a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom unit, is usually a family involved. There's more people who have a say. There's more to consider than just to pick up and go. And I think the people in the single family residence rental market, they don't intend to pop around from place to place. They're basically people who want to be homeowners, but don't want to make the financial commitment, can't afford it, whatever, insert reason, but they still have the mindset of, no, I'm going to go here and sit down for a minute. And I think when I look at, you know, my portfolio and some things that I wish I had known and done differently, is that trying to calculate and foresee how long people are intending to stay in your units, like that, it heavily determines your level of profitability. So I wouldn't say get into multifamily just because you think it's going to make more money. You kind of have to know, how long are people staying here? Like, is this a place? One of the places that I bought had no business buying it, because when I look at like the setup of the apartment, I'm like, this is a first time renter's apartment. This is a stopover, holdover apartment. It's like, I don't want to rent to stopover, holdover type of people, because every time they move out, you know, I'm spending more money turning units than I am collecting rent. And so it's like, going forward, and ironically, they are 1-bedrooms, but going forward is like, I'm not interested in holding rentals where I can clearly off the gate see this will be nothing but constant churn. And that is not something I thought about at the onset of purchasing. Nobody had told me that. And so you heard it here first. If you are a inspiring investor, please, please, please think about that. So with all real estate, you're going to be managing a couple of things, right? You're going to be managing your tenants and you're going to be managing the property itself. But when it comes to multifamily, there's a third thing that you have to factor in, And that third thing is that you will also be managing relationships. And I mentioned that earlier about how now you're literally the referee in people's disputes. And that's another thing that I didn't consider, because when I was a renter, I just didn't have many disputes with people. And I was never in a situation where I had like a person that I would call and talk about, this is what's happening. Yeah, that just never happened. So clearly that wasn't top of mind as an investor. And I think this is probably where most people make the mistake. We go into investments thinking about how we would operate, how we treated our apartments, how we interacted with our with the management team, et cetera, et cetera. Not exactly thinking that you may not be the profile of the renter, and they have a completely different mindset than you. And so I think that's why the managing of the relationships piece is such a shock to many investors, because you just didn't anticipate it. You didn't even know it was coming. Some of the things that like some investors are able to get away with, and then depending on the relationships of the tenants in your building, you may not be able to get away with is, for example, trash. So the trash is coming once a month, not once a month. They come to pick up the trash once a week. And, these small multifamilies very rarely have dumpsters on site. And so it is the tenant's responsibility to pull out their own trash cans. Well, you get complaints about where so-and-so is not taking their trash, or this or that. We try to make the operations as easy as possible. It's like, if you have your own trash can, it's your business to take it out. But, and that's what's easiest from an operation standpoint. But what's easier from the relationship standpoint is for the owner just to say, I'll get everybody's trash out. And so you're constantly making these trade-offs about like what's easier to do operationally versus what is going to keep everybody quiet. Because you'd be surprised at, how much the drama, the people aspect of it can really wear you down as an investor. Half of the issues that we encounter are not maintenance issues. They're actually relationship issues. And I have not found a way to manage through that other than ignoring them. And that's why my AI is there as a buffer, because I mentioned this in the previous video, how I'm trying to turn my maintenance manager into a bulldog, because her general disposition is to get involved and try to diffuse and this and that. And I keep trying to tell her, I'm not paying you to do that. And so you need to let them handle their own drama and move on. So I think if you consider, as you're trying to consider what kind of investments you want to do, like keep in mind that multifamily is a little bit like dorm life. It is a little bit like you've got it's just like college. You got these grown people who are trying to live their lives together, and you are the RA. So while I'm still a fan of multifamily, because for me, cash is king and we're in it to make money, I would still prioritize buying investments that have the most potential cash flow and that have lower risk in terms of non-pays and vacancies. But I do think that this whole relationship piece and managing multiple personalities, attitudes, let's not even talk about the people who have mental issues. Like, you put a person in an apartment building, they have a mental issue, and now, it's a lot that goes on. You know what I mean? You're trying to get other people to be understanding. The other thing is the operational reality. So if you have a single family residence and the toilet goes out, maybe you have one or two toilets in the unit, that may go out once that year. But when you have the multifamily, you can have a toilet go out every month for the next 4 months. And so I'm constantly saying, like, didn't we just fix that? Didn't we already do that? And they're like, no, it's another unit. No, it's a different unit. No. And so you do have to be prepared for that level of churn. And quite honestly, I think that was something that I did not properly look at, right? It's easy on the surface. It's like, oh, I got 7 units is working. Let me double that and get 7 or 8 more units. But I don't know if I realized that may take, 1 or 2 maintenance calls, that it was just going to blow that up to 16, 20 maintenance calls about the same issue. So it's a little annoying in that regard. And like, you have to be prepared for that. I think that's the way that the expenses not the expenses, but the way the maintenance and upkeep, the responsibility of it has just completely blown up. And so that's why it feels like with multifamily, there's always something going on. Like if you want quiet enjoyment, get a single family residence, because there's only one thing to break and it's not going to break that often. But with multifamily, you got the same pieces of equipment, 90 different places. They can all break at different, it would almost be better if they all broke at the same time, because then you could just send a contractor out, get rid of it. But it's like, oh, I called you this week about that. And then I got to call you next week about that same thing. And I got to call you the next week about that same thing. And so that's just something to consider about how difficult the operations can be when you're trying to get more cash flow. I guess it's the gift and the curse. The big question that I'm asking myself right now, looking back, should I have been optimizing to scale, or should I have been optimizing for simplicity from the very beginning? If I had to do it over again today, I would be trying to create simple operations, and I would 100% take into account tenant profiles, because your rental is literally only as good as your tenant profile. And I didn't have anybody to tell me that part. So it's no secret that I have this huge portfolio and now I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. I don't think the best investors are the ones with the most units. I'm starting to think that the best investors are the ones who have figured out how to have a portfolio that's big enough that it has great cash flow, but still small enough that it's easier to operate and that it kind of supports your life. Because quite honestly, running these properties could be a full-time job if I allowed it to be. And I'm just not in a place where I want to deal with people's drama. I just don't want to deal with the drama anymore. So if you're a real estate investor and you have suggestions, let me know down in the comments. And of course, if you have any questions, you're trying to get into real estate, I'll answer those too. My name is Jerry, and if you're still here, go ahead and give that like button a smash. Keep building that confidence so you can keep building that cash. I make videos for ambitious people who want to live life on their terms, and you can get a behind the scenes look at my businesses over on Substack at Confidence is Cash. And if you like the playbook and the cheat code, the cheat sheet of everything I said today, and you didn't get a chance to take notes, there's a link in the description for the ASAP, which is the action steps and playbook. I do it for every single episode. Make sure you get your copy if you're trying to decide between single family and multifamily residences for your rental property portfolio. That's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.